About 74,000 years ago, something happened that should have ended you. Not just you, your mother, your best friend, that person who cut you off in traffic last Tuesday. Every human being who has ever lived since that day exists only because a handful of our ancestors refused to die. This is the story of the worst day in human history, the day the sky turned to stone, the day the world froze, the day we almost vanished forever. Most people have never heard of Lake Toba. Today it is a beautiful vacation spot in Indonesia. Tourists take boat rides across blue water. They post photos of mountains on social media. They swim and laugh and have no idea they are floating inside a monster. Because Lake Toba is not just a lake, it is a scar. The scar left behind by the largest volcanic eruption the human species has ever faced. And when it woke up, it came within a whisper of erasing us completely. To understand what we lost and what we almost lost, we need to go back, way back. 74,000 years ago, Homo sapiens were not the only humans on Earth. We shared the planet with Neanderthals, who ruled the cold forests of Europe and Western Asia. With Denisovans, a mysterious cousin species we barely understand and have only recently discovered. And with other early human groups, whose names we have never learned and whose bones we may never find. Our own ancestors, Homo sapiens, had already left Africa. Small bands of us were scattered across the Arabian Peninsula, into India, possibly even into Southeast Asia. We were not numerous. They painted their bodies with red ochre. They buried their dead with care and ceremony. They told stories around fires at night, under stars unobscured by city lights. These were not brutes. They were not primitive versions of humanity waiting to become smart. They were fully human. They were us, just with less technology and more danger. A typical band might have included 20 to 30 people, extended family, brothers and sisters, parents and grandparents, aunts and uncles, everyone related, everyone needed. The men and women who would eventually become all of us. That would not come from millennia, but carefully shaped stone flakes for cutting meat and working wood, spears with sharpened stone tips for hunting, bone needles for sewing animal skins into clothing. They had fire, that ancient magic discovered hundreds of thousands of years earlier, which kept predators away and cooked food to make it safe and held the darkness at bay. They did not know it, but they were living in the last days of a world that was about to end. Sumatra, present-day Indonesia, a place our African ancestors would not reach for tens of thousands of years, but a place that would reach them with deadly force. Beneath what is now Lake Toba, a magma chamber had been growing for hundreds of thousands of years. Imagine a balloon of molten rock, inflating slowly under the Earth's crust, stretching the surface upward, creating a vast dome nearly the size of a small country. The pressure built, and built, and built. Then one day, the Earth cracked. The eruption did not start with a dramatic bang. It started with earthquakes, massive tremors that would have been felt across the region, the ground shaking so violently that any living thing nearby would have been thrown off its feet, trees swaying and toppling, rocks tumbling from hillsides, the very fabric of the land tearing apart. Then the cracks appeared, fissures tearing across the landscape, venting steam and sulfur gas into the air. The sky, which had been a clear tropical blue, began to turn strange colors, greenish, yellowish, sickly and wrong. And then the main event began, the day the sky died, how a supervolcano nearly erased humanity. The Toba supereruption released energy equivalent to thousands of nuclear weapons detonating simultaneously. A column of ash, rock, and gas blasted 25 miles into the stratosphere, punching through the atmosphere into space itself. The eruption column was so massive that it created its own weather system. The sound alone would have been heard thousands of miles away, a roar so loud it would have caused immediate hearing damage to anyone within hundreds of miles. A sound like the planet itself, screaming in agony. But the explosion was just the beginning. Within hours, a wall of superheated ash and gas, what scientists call a pyroclastic flow, was racing across the landscape at speeds exceeding 400 miles per hour. It incinerated everything in its path. Ancient forests vanished in seconds. Lakes boiled into steam. Animals were flash-fried where they stood. There was no escape, no warning that could have saved you. If you were within 200 miles of Toba when this happened, you simply ceased to exist, not killed slowly, erased from the earth in an instant. Then came the ash, not a light dusting, not an inconvenient layer to sweep off your porch in the morning. We are talking about ash falling meters deep across millions of square miles, ash that buried entire landscapes under suffocating gray blankets, ash that choked rivers and turned them into sludge, ash that killed every plant it coated, because plants need sunlight to survive, and the ash blocked the sun completely. Within days, the ash cloud had spread across the Indian Ocean. It reached the shores of India. It reached the Arabian Sea. It may have circled the entire globe multiple times. For our ancestors in Africa, thousands of miles from the volcano, the effects were not immediately violent. They did not see the explosion. They did not feel the earthquakes, but they saw the sky change. The sun, which had been a blazing golden disk, became a dim red smudge barely visible through the thick haze. Daytime looked like permanent twilight. The beautiful blue sky turned the color of old bruises, and temperatures began to drop and drop and drop. This is where Toba transformed from a local Indonesian disaster into an existential threat to the entire human species. A supereruption injects enormous amounts of sulfur dioxide gas into the upper atmosphere, the stratosphere. That sulfur combines with water vapor to form sulfuric acid aerosols. These tiny droplets are incredibly effective at reflecting sunlight back into space, and they stay there for years, sometimes decades. The result is a volcanic winter. Global temperatures may have dropped by 3 to 5 degrees Celsius. That might not sound catastrophic until you realize that the difference between our current comfortable climate and the peak of the last ice age is only about 5 degrees Celsius. In Africa, where our ancestors lived, the effects were devastating. The warm savannas that had supported life for millennia began to dry out and die. Lakes that had existed for thousands of years either evaporated or froze over. Rivers shrank to muddy trickles. The grass turned brown and brittle. The game animals our ancestors relied on, the antelope and wild cattle and gazelles, either died of starvation in massive numbers or migrated away desperately, searching for grass that no longer existed anywhere. Imagine being a mother in one of those small family bands. You have 3 children. Your partner was injured hunting last month and cannot walk far. The elders remember when food was plenty, when the hunt always brought something back. But now the stores are empty, and the landscape around you is turning gray and dead. The ash in the air makes every breath taste like metal and sulfur. Your babies are crying because they are hungry, and you have nothing to give them. The fire is low because there is little wood to burn, and the cold is settling into your bones. This was not one bad year. This was not a season of hardship that you could wait out. This was 6 years, maybe 10, maybe more. Year after year of cold, dark, hunger. Year after year of watching your family shrink, of burying children who starved in the night, of watching the old ones, who knew the most about where to find food and how to make tools, waste away first because they could not travel far enough to reach the last patches of surviving vegetation. Some bands broke apart in desperation, scattering into smaller and smaller groups, hoping that fewer mouths would mean survival. Some turned on each other, the social bonds that held them together fraying under impossible pressure. Some simply lay down in the ash and stopped moving, waiting for the end. The human population, already tiny and fragile, began to collapse. And here's where the science gets genuinely terrifying. Geneticists studying human DNA from people all over the world have found something that makes no sense at first. All humans alive today, whether from Tokyo or Nairobi or Oslo or Sao Paulo, are remarkably similar genetically. Far more similar than chimpanzees living in different forests, far more similar than our 7 billion population should suggest. The reason is a population bottleneck. Around the time of the Toba eruption, the human breeding population may have dropped to as few as 3,000 individuals. Some genetic models suggest even lower numbers, maybe just a few hundred breeding pairs. Think about that. The entire future of our species reduced to a group smaller than the audience at a small concert. Every person you have ever met, every historical figure you admire, every child who will ever be born, descends from that tiny handful of survivors. If just a few more people had died, If one more family band had been wiped out by cold or hunger or disease sweeping through the weakened survivors, that would have been it. Homo sapiens extinct. No cities, no pyramids, no Shakespeare, no moon landing, no internet, no you. The Neanderthals might have inherited the Earth, or maybe the Denisovans, or maybe no one. Maybe intelligence would never have reached the level needed to build civilization. Maybe the Toba eruption was the great filter, the cosmic event that stops most intelligent species from ever reaching the stars, and we only squeaked past it by pure blind statistical luck. So how did we survive? The answer is probably a combination of things. Geography played a role. Some of our ancestors were in the right places, pockets of Africa where the climate did not collapse completely, maybe near the southern coast, where they could fish and gather shellfish even when the land died. Maybe in the Ethiopian highlands, where volcanic terrain created microclimates that stayed habitable when the lowlands froze. But more than geography, it was probably something about us. Even in the darkest years, those last few thousand humans did something remarkable. They cooperated. They shared the last scraps of food even when they were starving. They cared for the injured and sick. They told stories that gave hope when the sky stayed gray. They looked at the ash-covered world and kept moving anyway. One theory suggests that the crisis actually accelerated human evolution. The immense pressure of near extinction may have selected for better planning, better communication, stronger social bonds, and more complex language. The survivors were the ones who could work together under impossible stress, who could trust each other when everything fell apart. Because once the ash finally settled, once the sulfur aerosols rained out of the sky, once the sun returned and the grass grew back and the animals returned, those few thousand people began to expand again, and this time they did not stop. Within 40,000 years, they would reach Australia. Within 50,000 years, they would enter Europe. Within 60,000 years, they would cross into the Americas. They would outlast the Neanderthals. They would build cities and write poetry and invent mathematics and send probes to Mars, all from a starting pool that could fit in a high school auditorium. Today, Lake Toba is peaceful. Tourists swim in its blue water and take photos of the surrounding mountains. They have no idea they are floating on top of a monster that is slowly waking up again. But you should think about it, because every time you look in a mirror, you are looking at a survivor. Every human trait you possess, your capacity for love, for language, for hope in darkness, for cooperation under stress, was tested in the worst conditions imaginable, and it passed. We are the children of the Bottleneck, the descendants of the ones who refused to die when the sky turned to stone. And that should terrify you, just a little, because if it happened once, it can happen again. Toba is still there. The magma chamber is refilling. Other supervolcanoes, like Yellowstone in America, slumber under our feet, capable of similar destruction. But it should also give you hope, because we have survived the impossible before. We have walked through the volcanic winter and emerged on the other side. And if we remember what those ancestors knew, that we survive best when we survive together, then maybe, just maybe, we will be ready when the sky falls again. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it. We are all survivors here.